quite a lot, they tell me, of holiday rentals here on Dangle Island. That's where the actual spans were built, folks. This is in this beach here coming up ahead of us on a very large barge, the very first railway bridge coming across the river behind us. This is done by the Union Bridge Building Company, who are based in Buffalo in America. They won the contract to build the very first bridge way back in 1886. They moved out here. The bridge itself, the first bridge, first went in operation back in 1889. Actually leased Dangle Island off Henry Dagger for 3 years. Actually brought their wives and kids across. Word has it there's about 400 Americans here living on Dangle Island for that 3-year period. She had their own school and their own newspaper. We'll talk a bit more about that later on, folks, but we're going to pull into the wharf. As you can see, there's not a great deal of vehicles on the wharf. The majority of things are moved around here by some form of cart or even wheelbarrow, as you'll witness very shortly. Turn the boat around, we're going to start making our way pretty well due west, in fact, up to our next port of call, up at Kangaroo Point. Now as we leave the wharf though, on our right hand side, folks, the northern side of the river, they tell me, from the coast west to the M1 motorway ahead of us. It's what's known as the Brisbane Water National Park, which is on 37,000 acres. Also on the southern side of the river, beyond Dangle Island of course, once again from the coast west to the M1 motorway, it's what's known as the Coringo Chase National Park, which is focused on 25,500 acres. Now back to Dangle Island, folks. As I said, gets its name from Henry Carey Dangle, purchased the island at an auction, paying £1 per acre. 76-acre island. As I mentioned earlier, there's several books telling different stories about Dangle Island, but there's one book in particular that tells you a little story about Dangle Island. Way back in about 1834, I think it was, roughly those years, something around there, was the, let's say the depot, we'll call it, of some 13 pirates. Now, they weren't pirates with wooden legs and patches on the rise, I'm afraid, but they're just what we really called aquatic bush rangers back in those days. A lot of out-of-work chaps, doing it a bit tough, you might say. Set up camp here, so to speak. The reason being, ladies and gents, the river back in those days was in fact the main mode of transport to get out west of Sydney. So the story goes, there's some 600 odd boats plying the river every day for one reason or another. So you could say, oh, dang around here on our left-hand side here, Mullet Island as it was known then, pretty good spot for a bunch of so-called pirates as set up camp. Now heading for the bridge, but on our right-hand side there, ladies and gents, we have Mullet Creek. Quite a shallow area, Mullet Creek. It too gets its name from Captain Governor Arthur Phillips, sorry, back in 1788. A lot of oyster leases up within the area. Now if you've been on a train in this area, ladies and gents, heading in, let's say north across the bridge here ahead of us, probably witnessed the train disappearing into the tunnel there on the northern side of the river, known as Cobra Point. But after it comes out of the tunnel, then proceeds for the best part of 8 kilometres along the foreshore of Mullet Creek on its way north to the next major train station known as the waterway. I'm afraid whoever believed was in the area of Mullet Creek, ladies and gents, it possibly missed the Wonderbine train station, for the platform itself is only about half the length of the boat. If you want to hop off the train at Wonderbine, I'm afraid you'll need to ride the last carriage. You actually have to let people form a guard. Now, Wonderbine train station, incidentally, is the only train station in Australia, they tell me, that has no vehicle access. It's only accessible by boat or bushwalking. Now, a lot of bushwalkers supposedly hop on and off the train at Wonderbine whilst completing parts of the Great Northern Walk. They would slow the trains down to 5 miles per hour, while it's a quick walking pace going across the bridge here ahead of us. Now, the old tunnels for the original bridge, folks, well, they're still on the hillside there, either side of the river, but they have been sealed up now. They tell me, throughout the 1970s, they were actually used as mushroom farms. As you come out from under the bridge, ladies and gents, we have Long Island here on our left-hand side. Ladies and gents, well, on the hillside there beside us, you'll possibly notice there's a couple of caves. The fact is, there are numerous caves upon this island here. Within them, there are some 300 known average dimensions of carvings within the sandstone caves here on Long Island. And that being the very reason, ladies and gents, I'm afraid whilst you are not allowed upon it unless you actually have a permit. We'll just come up ahead of us, ladies and gents. Those bird watchers are made up in the back of the boat. You might really see nice rock, folks. You can say it's heavily eroded. Just ahead of us, behind the grey mangrove tree, a much larger rock here. That's what the locals in fact call Beauty Rock. It is, they told me to pick that up upon a postcard of the lower Hawkesbury Brooklyn area. But as you slowly make your way by it, folks, you see it's a very good example of the different colours which are available within the sandstone. And a fine example of a wave effect. There you can see it's all been laid down over, imagine, millions of years. Beauty Rock. Ladies and gents. Bridge to Riverboat Postman. Been happening on the river, they tell me, since 1951. Yeah, coming up on our right hand side, folks, we've got Peat Island. Getting its name from the Peat family, first settlers in the area. Now one of the best buildings upon this area, building, ladies and gents, island. Now by the time the buildings were built though, back in 1905, the actual New South Wales government had changed, I'm afraid. They didn't like the idea of the previous government, so the story goes. So the buildings on both islands actually stood vacant until 1908. And they both handed over to the lunacy department. And they both became hospitals for the insane. But as we make our way past it, folks, as you can see, all the majority of the doorways and windows have all been boarded up. This actual facility was decommissioned back in 2011. It's been in the local media, we'll say, over the last 2 and a bit years. It's only a matter of months ago, in fact, that the Central Coast Shire Council actually handed this island back to the Darkinjong Aboriginal Land Council. Now, several of the villages upon the island are going to be renovated or, if you like, restored. Within 1 or 2 of them, there is to be an Aboriginal culture centre set up. Peat Island. Straight there, folks. Come past us. As I mentioned before, though, all the buildings upon this island ahead of us here were initially built, firstly, to house mail deliveries in this instance. Now, in 1910, this island ahead of us actually became a convalescent home for officers coming back from the very first World War for the area of this region. Ahead of us, folks. In fact, like enough we've got a white-bellied seagull on the roof of the branch here. Also, we have a white-bellied seagull just up ahead of us here. We'll slow down a bit. Now, supposedly the female of the species, the female larger of the two, its wingspan supposedly can exceed 2 metres. Mangroves here laying in the mud, you might say. We have the wreck of the very first HMAS Parramatta. And the fact is, it was the Royal Australian Navy's very first newly built warship. While we had a few other so-called hand-me-downs given to us by the UK, this vessel here was our first newbie. And there are in fact 6 of these built in total. 3 were built in Govan, Scotland, and 3 were built in State Dockyard on Hawkesbury River in Sydney Harbour. And this vessel here, folks, after being built in Govan, came out to Australia with a sister ship known as the Yarra. Made its way out to Australia back in 1910, both escorted to Hobson's Bay in Melbourne by another ship known as the Gibraltar. Now, word has it, in 1911, the third one was concluded in Govan in Scotland. Now, after it actually underwent sea trials, it was then completely dismantled, put on another ship, and started out and given it a state dockyard, you could say. It's a very large Meccano set. But back in those days, I'm afraid, or word has it, State Dockyard, Cockatoo Island, actually had no experience of building steel ships. That vessel became known as the Warrego. At the start of the First World War, the 3 vessels I just mentioned, the Warrego, the Yarra, and the vessel here on our right, the Parramatta, were the Royal Australian Navy's entire destroyer fleet. James Stanley, who was, they tell me, the very first white baby ever to be born on Dangle Island. He became nicknamed Big Jim, suppose he could carry 40 kilo bag of corn underneath his drum. Although I think back in those days, all pounds and ounces, but you won't argue. Now, bushfire, I'm afraid, went through that region there 20 years ago, but then all the original cottages. Everything's just been built within the area now, I suppose. Well, it has to be built out of fire retardant material. This area, folks, there's quite a lot of grass trees. In this area, those are supposedly just over 1,000 different varieties of native plants. Now, I mentioned the White-bellied seagull's nest. It's just slightly ahead of us. It's about 170 odd metres up from the foreshore in the boughs of an old dead tree. no town water, but it's power coming into the settlement. It's pretty much like any other suburb, but it is just on some 3 nautical miles away from what we like to call civilization anyway, down the river, really.